especially in this particular area, types of cases, are indeed physical objects in some sense and at some points in time. I think perhaps there is an ability to change all that drastically, and that perhaps some of the objects seen in that area and in many others around the world, the small light balls ranging from baseball to basketball size, and there is some indication that these might be a biomechanical device, perhaps in some cases a biological entity of some sort. So Marley has really turned my thinking around, and that's not based on beliefs. It's based on the facts, the data that we pull out of there. Right now we have 613 cases in an area measuring about a mile and a half north to south and about slightly over a mile east to west. So it's not a huge area. It's very remote. And one of our big problems we've encountered lately, of course, is no internet. And even in places I have a lot of problem getting BlackBerry connection. And so there are a lot of things that we want to send back, such as streaming video 20 or all night, every night of the week, to the website. So anyone that, if you think, okay, this is a bunch of bull, these guys are faking it, making it up, whatever, we have 4 dedicated CCD units, very high-tech instruments, covering the entire area around Site 1.
Where is this located?
Yeah.
What city, state, country?
Yeah, I can't even tell you the state. I can tell you it's in the central United States.
Okay.
And it's a little over an 8-hour drive from where I live, which is Branson, Missouri.
Let me ask you a fast question before you go into more details. Okay. Now, it's out of the way, so therefore there's no internet access. Now, if you have clear view to a satellite, though, there is satellite internet. It costs a fair amount of money. But there is such a thing as satellite internet, so if you can get a clear view to wherever in the sky the internet satellites are located, that might be an alternative.
Yeah, exactly. And we have checked on that, and it is available. The only problem is the cost. And, of course, we're operating strictly on a donation basis, and there's no funding from any entity anywhere. And or non-entity, I couldn't care less. But
at least you don't discriminate. That's very important.
Absolutely,
that,
yes. Absolutely. And they don't have to have just 2 legs. I don't really care. But
you mean even 6 or 12? It doesn't matter.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And what about invisible beings? They can be invisible too, right?
If they can physically get money to us, yes.
You know what, David? I think is thinking that I'm completely wacko right now, and I agree. But no, I get your point. It costs probably $60 or $70 a month, plus a horrendous installation setup fee for this internet service. You know, a lot of times they ask several $100s to buy the receivers, transceivers, and all this other stuff. You have to have some place for constant electric power to keep this going. There's a cabin maybe with electricity, so you have that particular bill. So it's not a trivial thing to do. All right, so let's continue with the description setting up this Marley Woods. So all this stuff is going on, and the only reason I kind of felt like stopping a little bit when you mentioned the possibility of UFOs being some sort of living creature. Didn't the late Ivan Sanderson say something like that too? Yes. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and of course I totally discounted it back at that time, and because what I was seeing back in those years were large metal-appearing objects landing and leaving behind landing pad marks indicating the weight of the object at anywhere from 8 to 14 tons. So that's not, a nightmare or a vision. That's a real physically massive object. And along with all the other types of traces we find, burnt plants and dehydrated plants and so on. But I am totally convinced in looking back at the 3,000 and I think 300 and some odd cases of landings with traces from 92 countries that I have. Looking back at all that data, you can quickly statistically see that this huge sway has started from the good old classic flying saucer, 30 feet in diameter, landing and little guys getting out and doing whatever they do, to the current thing, the current phase, which are the small light balls. And in some cases, not so small light balls, but predominantly small lights. And they also leave physical residue, not as large and drastic as the old classic saucers, but nevertheless, there's nothing we can do about it. It has changed. And very, very infrequently do we see reports like the classic old stuff of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s even. So that all has changed, and so we have to start looking at this in a much different way, or at least I do. I'm sure a lot of folks that still look at it the old way, but when things change, you have to change with them. You know.
Well, Ted, let me ask you a question. Now, in reading about UFO cases that go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we do hear reports. I mean, we do see reports of these light anomalies. So, I mean, that was happening. And like looking at the case of Marley Woods, where you've got this situation where you've got these light balls appearing and other kinds of things, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But when you say that the phenomenon has taken on a different twist, are we saying this in terms of a specific interest to localized regions, or do you feel comfortable making that statement as far as a global phenomenon? Because I know that, for example, in the last year, there's been a tremendous amount of activity out of South America. Argentina is in the grips of what definitely appears to be a wave of UFO activity, and a lot of it is indeed metallic craft. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about how you're on what information you're basing the statement you made just a few moments ago.
Right. Well, as you know, up until the last couple of years, really, I have concentrated only on landing cases with physical evidence. Mm-hmm. And so that greatly eliminates a lot of the sightings outside that, because South America has always been way replete with activity, and right. Some of the weirdest stuff that has ever been reported. And the interesting thing is, and I'm starting to see some of that weirdness at Marley, and very similar things to the Skinwalker Ranch, and that's a little disturbing in a way, but as a researcher, it's also quite exciting. But I do say that globally based. Now, again, you have to remember landings with physical traces. And right. And I have some pretty considerable restrictions to what physical traces, validated physical traces are. And, for example, they don't include crop circles. They don't include any case in which an odd area is found but no object is seen generating it, because you can't connect the two unless you have witnesses saying it happened that way.
Right.
And if the resulting residue then defies analysis as anything natural, then you have a really solid physical trace landing case. Mm-hmm. And what I'm simply seeing is the numbers have gone down so dramatically in my files, which I continue the trace work, but it's reached a point where if that's the only thing I was doing, I wouldn't have very much to do at all. And there were days in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that we couldn't begin to cover all of the trace landings that were taking place. And that's not happening today. Now, you get a lot of cases where, especially, well, I don't want to say that, but South American cases where you have so-and-so report, I saw an object the size of 5 football fields, and there were little people running all over, and maybe they'll find a hole or something in that area, and that's not a good, strong case. And so we can't just lump everything into the bucket
Right.
and say, you know, we're in a massive wave, at least not in the way that I look at waves. And because I've seen too many cases that sounded tremendously good totally fall apart under really critical investigation. Mm-hmm. And I've always maintained that wherever the cards fall, the way I look at an investigation is what you have. That's the hand you've got. And if it turns out after thorough investigation to be a hoax or a misperception of something natural, then that's the way it is. On the other hand, if it turns out to be, by analysis and investigation, a real event of something that remains unexplained after a thorough study, then you've got, as far as we can judge, a real thing. And there are always, you know, nagging questions even in those cases. So we have to be very careful when we see a lot of reports coming out of an area such as South America of these very odd cases. And I've always had that feeling, much stronger than I do now, because I see personally, and the team has seen, it's not just I, thank God, things that are happening that just flat should not be happening.
Hey neighbors, the easiest online meeting service, GoToMeeting, just got easier. If you haven't tried GoToMeeting, now's the time, because the new version of GoToMeeting has fully integrated voice over IP. With this new total audio feature, you have more audio options by being able to conference through a phone or the web, save time, save money, and be more efficient. Hold an online meeting with GoToMeeting. Try GoToMeeting free for 30 days. Visit gotomeeting.com/podcasts. That's gotomeeting.com/podcasts for a free trial.
Gene and I love to hear from our listeners. If you'd like to share your thoughts with us, send your messages to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to check out our website at theparacast.com, where you can download past episodes of the show for free and visit our dynamic discussion forums. Also, please patronize our sponsors. Tell them that you heard their ads on the Paracast. They'll appreciate it, and we will too.
Hi, this is Bud Hopkins, and you're listening to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg, David Gedney, and I completely, enthusiastically endorse this program. It's an absolutely great program with opportunities to stretch out and talk.
We're talking to Ted Phillips. He is the trace guy, and he looks for physical traces of UFOs. He works with the Center for Physical Trace Research. I had a fast question before we pick up on David's train of thought. How far back have these strange events at Marley Woods been traced to? Speaking of the pun of tracing.
1937. That's as far back as we've been able to go so far, with a living witness that can, or witnesses that can affirm that it's true. And I have a feeling that it probably goes back beyond that. And in those days, they had, of course, a very simplistic you have view of what's going on, because you have farmers, ranchers, and I don't mean that in a demeaning way at all. They're the best witnesses you can have, really. They see this stuff in 1937 and the 1940s, and they don't think like we do now, oh, it must be military. They think in terms of swamp gas and things along that line. And because UFOs were unheard of in those days. But we have found some really interesting cases back in the middle of Marley Woods from 1937 on up. And then we found a couple of satellite areas outside of Marley where the rancher and his family confirmed that they would sit around on their farm and watch the big orange lights and the small white lights frolicking in their fields in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and it's still going on. So that's quite a while.
All right, here's a question, Ted. Let's go scientific here, just for argument's sake. there's been this ongoing series of reports of relatively small amber and white light balls. Or is it just amber? What's the color range here?
Well, the ambers are something entirely different from the light balls. The ambers are very large, orange yellow, and it's the oddest shade of that color that you can ever imagine. I've tried to duplicate it on the computer, and I can't even get close to it. I've never seen a color like it. And these things are much, much larger. I had the opportunity to see 5 of them in daylight at Site 1, and the property owner and I were there, and thank God 3 guys drove up in a pickup telling us they were watching them. But the first 3 appeared in a horizontal row, followed by a 4th in the eastern sky, and then by it, a 5th object. The 5th object was by far the closest. And I'm telling you, it's incredible to stand there and look at these things in daylight. No smoke, no parachutes, no wings, no airplane behind them or anything else. Just this oval, vertically oval object with totally no sound. And at this location, you could hear a pin drop a long way off. No motion whatsoever. And my impression in looking at it, around the outside edge of this thing, starting at the top on the right side, you come down the oval side, around the base, back up the left side, and the line ends. And that was a band of the weirdest purple light I've ever seen. And the top portion of this oval was open and the amber color. And for a nuts and bolts guy to stand there with the idea going through his mind, the minute and 37 seconds that we watched these, the thought that something was going to come out of or through that object. And now, that's the only thing I could tab it with was a portal, or God help me, I never thought I'd even use the word, but that's all I could tack onto it.
Well, that does indeed sound familiar to one of the descriptions I remember reading in the book about the Skinwalker Ranch case. You're kind of you're close to that. You're close to that neighborhood. Now, question for you: you saw this thing. You said it wasn't moving.
Right.
How did you see it manifest? How did it manifest itself?
The things come on. The easiest way and the most accurate way to describe the appearance is when you open an old leaf shutter on a camera. It opens up to whatever aperture you have it set at, and then when the event's over, it closes into itself that same way. That's the best, most accurate way I can describe that.
It's kind of like an iris up, iris down, iris in, iris out.
Yeah.
When this is happening, so you saw this happen, did you have any sense of whatever this was having awareness of your presence? No,
I didn't sense anything coming from it at all. But your impression, and I'll tell you what I didn't say, my impression was, because I could see the terrain around it, and knowing that terrain over there now quite well, this object was no more than 800 feet away and no more than 1,000 feet above the field. And it appeared to be about 12 feet high, about 8 feet wide. And now that would be impossible to gauge in the dark, but this was daylight. And we had a lot of things around to judge by. But I don't know. The only sense of anything that I had was that something could come through this. 5 years before that, I would have never had a thought like that, I'll guarantee you.
Right. But this doesn't look like you hadn't seen anything else like this during the time you spent at the Marley Woods site, correct?
Like the ambers, you mean?
No, like this whole construct.
Well, that was the closest sighting I've ever had. I've seen and photographed a lot of the things, the ambers, but they were a greater distance away. And actually, our team got on 3 separate units, video of 7 of the ambers as it came on, went out, and a couple of great still digital high-resolution photos that shows a very distinct shape and brightness areas and colors and so on. And if anybody knows what could look like this in the sky, I'd like to hear about it.
There are some shots on the website. There's one shot of what appears to be this strong light source with an amber aura around it, showing through what looks like some trees. That looks like it's at, that's not at a high altitude, though, right?
No, that's on the ground, and that's an entirely different. That's what we call a light mass, and those also repeat and in that same area. I first photographed that in November or something of 1999. And then this latest event in the same spot was in December.
December 2008. Yes. All right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So there are, quite a number of different types of events that take place, and they range from what we've been talking about, light balls, to the large ambers, to the light mass, to the unknown forces that exert a great deal of energy moving things around, knocking people to the ground and knocking down steel gates and all sorts of things. And what the property owner calls the North Mystery Light and the South Mystery Light. And these are repeaters. And the very latest sighting from Marley was last night at 6:17, and that was of the North Mystery Light. And if you go back to what you were talking about from Skinwalker, where the guy would go out, he had a stump, he'd prop his elbow on it and watch through his rifle scope, and he actually could see what looked like another world inside this orange object.
Right.
And as though it was an open portal of some kind. Well, that's fascinating because there have been 110 sightings since April 11th of 99 of this North Mystery Light. The thing comes on over an area where there is nothing except dense trees, a few fields, very high ridges, and it comes on in exactly the same spot. It remains stationary very close to the ground for sometimes 3 or 4 minutes. Then it starts to ascend, to climb. It brightens. It sometimes gets extremely bright. And we captured that on 4 separate units, 2 nights in a row last November. And it's quite apparent. And I looked at it through a pair of binoculars, and it is a horizontally oval thing that looked just like the vertical amber thing that I saw in daylight, except on its side. And the form is quite apparent. And it has this soft and almost creepy orange, off-orange shading. And this thing has actually climbed all the way from the due north sky all the way over to the eastern sky over an old barn, and then snaps out. And sometimes the South Mystery Light will come up out of the south, hover 5 minutes, climb, hover 3 minutes, and so on, make its way over the old east barn, snap out, and at that instant the north light comes on, and it comes up eventually to the same point over the old barn and snaps out. And that's a connection we're trying to study very carefully. And I've taken some more high mag equipment, imaging equipment over, in hopes of getting this mystery light in a highly magnified view where we can see if indeed there is anything visible inside that mass. But it's tremendously interesting. In Skinwalker, I don't know, I've read it a couple of times, and I think my wife has read it to me about 5, and pretty interesting stuff, especially when you see some of those things happening over at Marley.
Now, a question for you. You say that you captured on 4 different devices this thing on video devices with
yes.
triangulation?
Mm-hmm.
Really? So has that then helped you, having multiple video devices at different locations, has this assisted you in trying to calculate the size of this thing?
Yeah, it has, and the location. Now, here we're talking about the Mystery Light, North Mystery Light.
Correct.
We actually, on one of those occasions, by pure luck, I had the transit over there with me, and I had it right in the maw of cameras, and I put the transit on it, centered crosshairs, locked it, and which gave me the precise bearing of this thing, and which was 8 degrees off of north. And so then, using such wonderful things as Google Earth, expert GPS, and so on, you could lay out a line from our camera position right along that 8-degree bearing, and there is totally not any single light source for 50 miles in that direction.
There's no way it was any kind of a reflected light or nothing like that. You annihilated those possibilities.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, this thing, when it becomes bright, it becomes the most dazzling bright that you have ever seen. And just about 3 weeks ago, Tom and I and the property owners saw one of the small light balls, which had a bit of a gold tinge to it, about 600 feet away down in some sparse trees right in front of the old cabin. And the thing was amazing. And I've not seen but a handful of the light balls, and this was the closest I've seen them. And, I mean, it was just an astonishing thing. You could see it going behind trees. It was very, very small, but the light was super intense. And it has that sort of dazzling, you know, when you look at Venus at its brightest, how it has that kind of...
shimmers. It shimmers.
Yeah, shimmers. Yeah,
absolutely. Sure.
Yeah. And that's what we were getting with this little guy trucking along down there. And, I mean, it's truly incredible. It is the coolest place on this planet to be, I'll guarantee you.
It's interesting you talk about that shimmering light. A couple of nights ago, I was watching a thing on Nova about these, I think they're called the Humboldt squids. These really very dangerous squids that apparently can, like, rip. They can take a cow down the skeleton in, like, 15, 20 seconds or something. They're these intense beings, and they're these you know, they live very deep under the sea, and their primary communications mechanism is that their bodies are bioluminescent, and they shimmer these different colors and at different stroboscopic rates. Yeah, and this one diver had built this rig that he took down the water with him, because apparently you're not supposed to get near these things if you're not, like, in a shark cage. He decided to take... Right. Now, he did, him and his cameraman did, and they went down, and he had this tube with this light source inside of it that he could set these different lights inside of it to strobe at different rates. So he goes down the water with this thing, and he turns it on, and one of these Humboldt squid comes up at him, and they're these formidable-looking creatures. And at first, it gloms onto the tube as if it were going to try to, like, take it or attack it. Then it goes away, and but then it comes back a second time, and he's got this thing strobing. And this squid, which, again, the locals are deadly afraid of these things because they're so dangerous, now this thing is, like, caressing him. And it all of a sudden it becomes completely docile, almost as if there was some level of communication created. So this now brings me back to the Marley Woods with these light entities. Mm-hmm. So... do you get the sense, and part of, I guess this is a complicated question, because on your website you have this whole section about the unseen forces, where
yes,
and there are things that have been physical these things are manifesting in a physical way where they're doing property damage.
Yes.
So do we then also have reports of these things that people are having being attacked by these forces?
You know, that's the unseen forces, and I say that because the instance where the couple is knocked to the ground,
Right.
Obviously unseen because she was sitting in the car at high noon on a beautifully clear day and watches as her husband is knocked to the ground, and she sees nothing near him or above him. Mm-hmm. And then she walks up to that point, and she has two sharp impacts to the upper left shoulder, or right shoulder, and she's knocked to the ground. And this lady, let me tell you, it would take some energy to get her on the ground. And it's, you know, so that's where the term unseen comes up. And
right.
And also it's because in the numbers of events, no one has seen what has knocked down, pushed down two 12-foot steel gates, and that's happened 4 times on 2 different ranches. And what has pushed a 4-wheel drive truck with no engine locked up and in gear 12 feet down a driveway, a gravel driveway, with the tires digging trenches because they're not turning. And 5 of us tried to move that truck, and we couldn't move it an inch. And just repeat events like that, you know, it's just... I don't know what we're dealing with there, but we had the latest of those events was in October of last year. They don't happen frequently, but they get your attention when they do. And now the small light balls, as far as any kind of sensing by witnesses of something there, other than a light going by, we've had them pass by people within 3 or 4 feet at shoulder height, and between 2 witnesses standing 10 feet apart, and one of the things flies right between them, and they turn and follow it across the gravel road out into a field, makes a right-angled turn, goes into a dense clump of trees, and explodes into countless tiny golden-colored lights. It's pretty difficult to explain. Now, we had on October 25th a family of 4, a lady, her husband, her 2 sons, aged 12 and 20. And they were in the area, and they were kind of picnicking. And all of a sudden they see something coming in to the west, a small light. And the lady had been doing some videotaping of their fun and frolic, and so she clicks the thing on, and she captures the entire event, which begins with this what appears to be a single light, arcing in, coming in within 100 feet of them, and then it goes through all kinds of maneuvers. It swings like a pendulum. It goes up and down like a yo-yo, which we get a lot. Then side to side, then it makes some curves and circles, and it flies off camera, and about 20 seconds later from the right side into view comes what looks like another single white light, and as it arcs around, it splits into 2 of these lights, and we've got tons of video of the larger white objects splitting into 2, and some of the small ones, but as they split in 2, they just kind of cavort around within 40 feet of these people. There's a total of 15 minutes of video, and the 2 lights eventually move on to a point about 70 feet away out in a dark wood area, and they're hovering by a tree very near the ground. And they've gone back to kind of a single elongated white faint light, and it's moving back and forth there, and they're watching it, and it's really great to listen to them on the tape, because these people were becoming quite afraid. And to make matters even worse, there is a little kind of a picnic table, heavy wooden picnic table, underneath a metal pole shed, and they were quite close to that, and they started hearing something walking. And the area is backlit from a mercury vapor farm light 600, 700 feet away, where they could have seen anything moving, and they couldn't see anything, but you can hear it like steps in the gravel on the audio, and all of a sudden the 12-year-old outside of this shed is yelling, look at this, look at this. And finally they back up, and just over the northeast corner of this shed, maybe 2 or 3 feet from the shed itself, is the most brilliant red light that I've ever seen.
I'll tell you what, I have a brilliant light in front of me. It says, you're late with your break. See, it says so right here. Here.
Okay.
Fate magazine is proud to be celebrating its 60th anniversary and its 700th issue. That's 60 years of bringing you true reports of the strange and unknown. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, life after death, and much, much more. It's bigger and better than ever. Subscribe now by calling 1-800-728-2730 or online at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
Hi, this is Roger with eFoodsDirect.com, and I just wanted to welcome everyone from the Paracast show. Hi to Gene and David and everybody out there. Listen, we're here to sponsor this radio show because we really like what Gene and what Dave are doing, and we'd like you to help us support them. Now, we are a long-term storable food company. However, the foods that we produce are low-moisture foods. They're very, very high quality, and you can live on them every day. You can literally cut your grocery bill in half or more than half, maybe as much as 60%, by buying bulk foods from eFoodsDirect.com. But right now, a recession/depression is on the way. We're advising people to sell the toys in the garage, hawk off the old jewelry you don't use, pour the money into food supplies before it's too late. I'm telling you, it could be too late. We also can provide water filtration, other needs. Call eFoodsDirect.com and let us continue to support Gene and David here. 800-715-4380, 800-715-4380, or go to eFoodsDirect.com. That's eFoodsDirect.com, 1-800-715-4380.
You've entered another dimension. You've entered the Paracast.
We're talking to Ted Phillips, the fellow who is presenting us startling information about all the goings-on at Marley Woods. Let us continue, sir.
So this bright red light, you see this in the video, Ted?
Yes. And the son took several pictures with his cell phone, generally not good, but these were sharp. I mean, they were great photos. And you can see the roof of the shed and the object, and the nucleus, the center, the core of this thing, looked like a kind of elongated bar of light. And I have never seen red that intense, and the brightness is just totally incredible. The first thing I thought when I saw it was, well, if I get a couple of feet from one of these, I'm not touching it. And because you had the impression of a tremendous amount of energy, and as the light came out from the center, it formed a somewhat less bright red globe of light. And suddenly last year we start for the first time getting reports in Marley of the small red light balls. And this was a perfect example. And now I've got to tell you the downside of all this. The lady showed the video to a friend of hers who happened to be a friend of SIU, and she called us and she said, "You got to see this." So finally, after a week, I got them to agree to talk to me. We went back to the same area, and she was showing me the video on her camcorder. The son showed me the shots on his phone camera. And so I said, please, is there any way I could talk you into a copy of this for research? Well, okay, yeah. So she had been shooting after that, us in the area on night vision and so on. And it wasn't on night vision when she was shooting the lights. And didn't think anything about it. We go up, and I start copying this 15-minute tape. And just about at the point where the red thing appears, I see the current date come up on the tape. And she taped over about 8 minutes of this tape, which included the red object. And so I absolutely pleaded with her, please get me those cell phone photos. And she said, okay, I will, I promise. And about a week later, she called and she said, my son accidentally erased them. Well, I think very probably what happened was they were getting scared about possibly getting into the public eye. And first of all, they wouldn't have the talent to come up with this video. And secondly, I wouldn't doubt their credibility at all. You would have to talk to them to understand how this could happen. I'll put it that way. But it's the most incredible light ball stuff that I've seen. And on the website, I've got a couple of stills I pulled out of the video and enlargements. And you can see that rather than being just a light, these things each represent a circular sort of cloud of some sort of material that's constantly changing color and shape. And it is a very flux and dynamic thing that's going on within those. I've pulled hundreds and hundreds of stills out, and the more I look at them, the more intriguing it is. And I put together a frame-by-frame animations enlarged where you can actually see what's going on, and I can't imagine how you would duplicate it. I really can't.
Now, most of that content at this point is not on your site, correct?
Right, yeah.
Right.
I told Adam, I said, let's keep the video off of the website and out of the public eye for a little while, because I want, not that I doubted these people, but I wanted to really, really check the video closely and pull out everything I could. I didn't want them or a friend to go on a website and say, hey, I saw your video on there. And then, you know, because that's exactly their, of course, we would never use their name, certainly not going to use the location, but I couldn't quite really convince them of that. And I even had several of the local witnesses tell them, you know, really, they've kept all this quiet for over 10 years. You know, he's telling you the truth, but you would just have to personally talk to those four witnesses to understand the situation. And they're great people, and so on.
I think it's important that people realize, and I think certainly reasonable people will realize that while there are many of us who are interested in these topics and will go public about our participation, there are a lot more people that are not comfortable with this and that don't want to be associated with it. And I think that's sometimes a hard thing for people who listen to these types of shows that we do and who follow this type of material to really get a good understanding of. You know, people want answers, and I think a lot of people who are interested in this would say, well, if I saw something, I'd be right on TV saying it. And chances are they might not be if they realized what the ramifications of that would be. Along those lines, yeah. I mean, you've kept this area sort of, you're not saying where it is. Is this based on the locals' request that you not do this?
Yes, from the first phone call, yeah. Because they are normal, average people who represent all walks of life, and they don't want a bunch of reporters coming down, beating them to death, and then start making fun of all these hick farmers and ranchers and lawyers and on and on and on, because they're making what to the media are goofy reports. And they don't want to be subjected to that, and they shouldn't be.
They don't want to be like Stephenville, Texas, or Roswell, New Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. And can you imagine, with this stuff going on, how many people would flood into that area to try to see it? And, I mean, these are people who have gated and locked ranches, and they have caretakers with guns to be sure people don't come in. Not because of these lights or anything like that, but because they've got hundreds of prize cattle, horses, all kinds of things that could be harmed. And so I respect that. And Alan Hynek taught me a long time ago that we have to respect witnesses because they don't have to tell us anything about any of these events. They're doing us a favor. We're certainly not doing them a favor by getting the information and putting it out in a way where they can be harmed by hordes of people. And so I've stuck to that. Now, I will use names if a witness says it's absolutely fine, and I tell them, what could happen, and if they're still good with it, okay. But I really would rather, it's much easier to believe 219 witnesses in this area who have never spoken a word publicly, because you don't make up this great big lie and keep it to yourself. It just makes no sense. And and they don't talk that often among themselves about what they've been seeing. Now, occasionally, if there are, just one or two, and one of them says, well, have you seen? Yeah, I have seen, and it goes kind of from there. But so we have to handle it carefully. But I am also a believer in, and that's the reason for this website, I believe in getting this stuff to the general public, because it's totally ignorant to gather 613 cases and file them away, and no one ever has a chance to see them or to read about them. It makes no sense. And the more people we can educate along these lines, perhaps some more good cases we'll get. And I firmly believe that,
So, Ted, a question about this. Let's step back, a larger framework question. A lot of what you're describing, that there are similarities, though, certainly, and we'll talk more about that certainly in the second hour. There are a bunch of similarities about what is being seen here in this area and what happened at Skinwalker. Do you know of any other cases anywhere in the world where you've had a similar type of situation to this one? Have you heard of anything along those lines?
There was there was a ranch in Colorado, and one of my favorite people on earth, Leo Sprinkle, investigated that. And when Leo says it's yes, and I believe it's yes, and but they had a lot of things similar in some ways to Marley, similar in some ways to Skinwalker. And then the Yakima Indian Reservation, they've had an ongoing situation for years. I remember Alan talking about some of those cases. He went up there a number of times, and they involved, to a great extent, the small lights. And I shouldn't even say small lights. They're not small lights. They're small spheres. And I don't use the term orb because you know what that brings up.
The bad photographic evidence.
Yeah. So...
these are emanating light. These are eminent. Listen, these are very different than orbs. Orbs are 99% of the time dust specks illuminated by flash, seen way up close to the camera lens so that they're completely out of focus. And then people will do the little crazy visual Rorschach thing, and they'll see faces inside of the... Yeah. It's just like, whatever. At that point, you have to let that go. But no, what you're talking about here, and the photos you've got on your website are things that are emanating light. That they are generating light. That doesn't reflect anything. They're in darkness half the time. So.
Yes, absolutely. And let me tell you this, the light mask thing is really fresh in my mind because it just happened a few weeks ago. the thing came on, and we had just watched the North Mystery Light, photographed it. We had just watched a small kind of orangey light ball down in the trees below us, and then this thing comes on. It was a good night. And so Tom, the property owner, and I are looking, and I've got the video camera going, and this thing would reduce down to being invisible. It was that faint. And now Tom, with the night vision scope, could still see it, but even in that it was very faint. And then it would come up, and there were points where this thing flared up so tremendously bright that on looking at the video from the camcorder, and not in night vision, it flared up one time to a point where it was intense red, and it actually washed out the camera view, and we were 0.8 of a mile from this thing. I can't imagine what would have happened to your eyes if you'd been 20 feet in front of it. But and of course, Tom and I, it was visible an hour and 20 minutes, and we beat ourselves to death trying to find a road, a lane, any way into that area. And it is such dense woods. You couldn't even get an ATV in there because we have access to a couple of those. And so we were alongside it at one point. The property owner was still back at Site 1. He was watching the light mass, and he saw our headlights come up about 900 feet to the west of the light mass. And that's where we stopped. We got out, and we tried to spot it. Couldn't see it. So from the side, it was not visible. From the back, it was not visible. And some of these things tend to be like that. They tend to be directional in that you have to be directly in front of them to see it, as though you had a light source inside a pipe, and you don't see it from the sides above or below.
But that brings up a really critical point, Ted. I mean, when you describe that, and what I'm hearing is that this, whatever this is, knows that it has to essentially point at you for you to see it.
Well, yeah.
Well, so in other words, what I'm trying to understand here, I think what Gene and I are both wondering about is, what are these things doing? And when you put it in, when you couch it in that context, it's kind of like, well, this could be there and doing things in a way where you wouldn't see it if it wasn't pointed directly towards you. But the fact that it is almost like maybe I'm overreading this, but it sounds almost like it's a clue that it wants to be seen. You know, you describe what this family saw, this picnic thing, and you have these lights moving in these weird sort of configurations that don't seem to make much sense, but start to make a little sense if you assume for a moment that these things are wanting to be noticed. It's almost like, and again, I could be reading far more into this than what's actually there, but with all of this, you start to wonder about a sense of communication.
Well, don't you think, David, you've just raised a higher level point there, that other UFO events may also have been staged by whoever or whatever is responsible strictly for the purpose of being seen? Because there was no other logical reason for them to be there.
I think the O'Hare sighting of November 2006 falls squarely into that category.
What about the sighting that you and your family had back in Venezuela?
Now, you see, that one is an interesting problem, and Ted is probably not aware of that, but everybody who listens to the Paracast knows that in the summer of '74, my brother, my parents, myself, and God knows how many other people, it was probably thousands of other people, saw a huge cigar craft hovering over Caracas, watched a portal in the bottom open up, watched 3 discs emerge from this thing, position themselves in a triangulation formation around this craft, and the whole thing blinked out. But what I'll tell you there, Gene and Ted, is that I don't think in that sense that this thing wanted to be seen. My perception at the time was that this thing was having a problem. and it was not able to cloak itself. And it's my perception, and I certainly don't know this, so I'm just throwing it out there, that the 3 discs came out, created a triangulation around this thing, essentially to, and again, I'm not claiming this is what happened, but my guess, what I think I said on the episode was that I felt the thing had not left, that it was still there, except it was rendered invisible. And that the 3 craft had come out to essentially bend light around it so that it couldn't be seen. I get the sense that this thing was having a problem of some sort, or was trying to do something that had to have it at a low altitude. These very large cigar craft are not often seen at a relatively low altitude. They're usually seen fairly high up. This thing was relatively low, and that the craft came out of it, and that we were watching all this. I don't have the sense that this was a display. I have a sense that this was an unforeseen circumstance and that it really didn't want to be there.
Okay, so in a situation like that, David, the UFOs have the ability to hide themselves when they want to be hidden, assuming the equipment built by the lowest bidder, of course.
No, I assume that anything that can move at the speeds that these things move at can certainly mess around with light in a way that would, render its invisibility, from their point of view, a trivial process. Yeah, I don't get the sense.
Well, I said the lowest bidder just to be silly because we're about to break for the hour break, and we're talking to Ted Phillips. We focused a lot on the Marley Woods incidents, of which there are many, and it's not a place you're going to visit because the location is being kept secret. Although, maybe some people will find it, but we're not helping, and Ted doesn't want to upset the people who live there. He's also involved with the Center for Physical Trace Research at UFOphysical.com. We have the link for that at the Paracast site. Ted Phillips returns with us on the Paracast on the other side of the hour.
Welcome back to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedny.
Ted Phillips, the UFO trace expert of the planet, involved with the Center for Physical Trace Research, established since 1998, now over 11 years, and he's been investigating, he and his crew, the Marley Woods incident from some place in the United States that we're not going to reveal. And if you ask us, we're still not going to reveal it because the people there don't want to be annoyed. They apparently don't want to become another Roswell, New Mexico, and we certainly see what happened to Angela Joner, the newspaper reporter in Stephenville, Texas, when she got, caught up in that particular case.
There's an important thing here to mention about Ted, Gene. And it's interesting, Ted, because a lot of people who are interested in this topic, who have gotten interested in it the last, let's say, 5, 6, 7, even 10 years, they've never heard your name. And I think it's important to mention that as far as the Center for Physical Trace Research, while it was officially established in 1998, you've actually been involved in this field gathering physical evidence for a lot longer than that. And I just want to start this second hour by saying how much I know I personally deeply respect what you've been doing, because you're someone who is about as far from an armchair expert as you can get. I mean, you're out in the field doing real reconnaissance work. And I think we want to pay tribute to that, because in a field that is polluted by people who have no understanding, no history, no verifiable background, you, sir, are gold-plated. You're in there and you are doing hard work. Your credentials, from where I can see them, are pretty darn solid. Your agenda is a very productive and I think very reasonable one. And sometimes we get taken to task for treating our guests too harshly. Sometimes we're accused of treating our guests a little too harshly. Sometimes we're accused of maybe treating some of our guests with kid gloves. But in your case, Ted, I just want to say that in educating myself about your background and the work you've done, I don't see any equivalent to you. And I think it's sad that the Paracast is one of the only shows that you can hear about your experiences. And I think that says a lot about the media that other people are doing in this field, because I can go to your website and I can see a good amount of evidence. There's some videos up there of these lights showing up above the field, and you hear the animals making these wild sounds, when these things come on. You're not just throwing things out as your opinion. You're coming up with hard evidence, and I think kudos to you, sir, for doing that, and for having the integrity of not being someone who's looking to sensationalize this. That's the exact opposite of what you're doing. You're being very careful and very very proper about this. And I just want to, before we get into the second hour, just say that to you in front of our audience, in front of Gene. I think that you deserve a tremendous amount of support, and I find it frustrating to see someone like yourself with integrity, doing real work, having a hard time making this work financially. I just want you to know that I think Gene and I strongly believe in what you're doing, and anything that we can do to help you is not only our pleasure, but I think it's our duty to do that.
It's unfortunate, I think, also that so many people who do get recognition in the field, and there are a lot of good ones we've had on the show, but there's some people who are armchair researchers. You're out there in the field, you're getting your hands dirty, you're going to do on-site investigations, and that can certainly try one's patience and certainly destroy your financial picture and your financial future for a long, long time. So do you do this all by donations to the site? How do you cover the costs?
Yes, that unfortunately is all we have, which is, it's not bad. And I want to thank you guys for those very, very nice words. I appreciate it. But I had the best guy pushing me forward that you could possibly have in Alan Hynek. And so that anything I do is based on what would Alan do. And we have to rely on donations. Unfortunately, everything is getting, guess what, more expensive. And guess what? There's less and less money flying around. And, our situation with the website is because suddenly, since we're getting a number of hits, we need to go into the direct server mode, which costs $100 a month, and either that or being shut down. And I've wanted absolutely to stay away from a subscription sort of situation, and that way folks, by whatever means they have, can send us $1 or $5,000. And but they'll be able to access, and they don't have to send the $1 to access the material, the data that's on there, which is my primary interest, to get the data out to the people. And so they could be a little more educated on what is going on. Very few people realize how much of this activity there is on a daily basis. Back in the 70s, for example, had they known in 1973, and it got a lot of coverage, but had the average citizen known how many landings with little guys and all kinds of things were going on nightly, daily, there might well have been a little bit of panic on the part of some people. And so an educated public is going to be a lot less likely to panic. And, of course, we want more data. The more data we have, the more reports people send us, the better we can understand what we're trying to look at right now. As you guys were talking last hour about the situation with the light from these things being perhaps directional, and you made the comment messing with the light, and that's exactly what I'm beginning to believe is going on. I'm beginning to think more and more that this invisibility, visibility, and in between is more of a matter of frequency than anything else. And that's being acclaimed now by even some scientists of how we can, for example, using an electromagnetic field, microwave type energy, make something invisible. They're actually very deep into playing with that right now and bending light around something. So who knows, 10 years from now, 5 years from now, this stuff may not sound nearly as weird as it sounds today. And I'm a good example because 10 years ago, I wouldn't have, probably wouldn't have even investigated this stuff unless there was physical evidence. And now I take a totally different approach. I'm still the guy that's on the fence, and I'm not jumping either way until there's enough evidence to indicate that it is this way or that way. So the light balls are kind of the love of my life right now because by being lucky and being and I've looked at this statistically in every way I can to find any kind of pattern that might put us right in the middle of a nest of these things where we could get good, close visual and video, or I should say more, because you always need more. It's like my wife says about my antique camera collection, how many old cameras do you need? Well, in the case of light balls, you need as many as you can get. So it's fascinating, and I've got to tell you, of all the stuff that I've done, and I have been blessed in doing a lot of tremendously interesting stuff. Marley Woods is absolutely the best single area of evidence that I've ever encountered. It keeps going on. That's the important part.
Ongoing. Now, John Keel used to write about window areas, specific locations that would attract UFO and or paranormal activity. And
yes.
Are we assuming here that Marley Woods might be one of these areas? And if that's the case, how many other areas around the world are we seeing?
I think probably if governments would encourage their folks to report events, no matter how silly, how goofy they might sound or appear, to a government entity, and I, of course, don't see any of this happening, those countries would send that information, pass it along into a central database. I think that there would be numbers, I don't know how high, of areas like Marley. And it's just the fact that some of them may be occurring in areas where the people just flat don't want to even talk to their family about it. And I've had cases like that where witnesses didn't even want to tell their parents. And, it's an experience you have to understand, seeing a UFO. And especially if it's a very high strangeness event. And, it's a practically once-in-a-lifetime thing. And a lot of people have problems processing it. For example, again, at Marley, there is an area which, over the past 10 years, have been quite a number of cattle mutilations. And, I've never been too interested in the mutilation end of this stuff. I've seen a lot of photos. I've talked to a lot of researchers. But these cases have really grabbed me because of the property owner and his credibility and his reluctance to deal with it. This stuff is ongoing. We had several events last year on his ranch, including cattle and deer, and in one case a large buck, and we're talking about surgical-type precision removals of organs or flesh or a head or whatever. And in addition to the removal of the head or the organs, so on, there was found in many of these cases on this particular ranch, within 5 or 10 feet of the animal, a scorched 10-foot circular ring. And that's physical evidence. And these areas were not scorched and burned by fire, but by some kind of very concentrated high-temperature heat, and no accelerants or anything like that. And in some of those areas, very green grass and fescue that would be hard to ignite without some kind of accelerant, but that all shows up in analysis. You can't just go out and burn a ring and fool someone, if they're willing to take the time to study it. So you've got those in conjunction with these events. They're was a series of additional animal events through the summer and fall this last year. And one of the most impressive events, and what I'm coming to is the fact that this rancher, who I have tremendous respect for, cannot bring himself to processing or dealing with what's going on because it's out of his control. And this is a guy for many years that has taken care of himself, his family, his ranch. And a couple of weeks ago, he told me, he said, "Dad, please, anything I've got to do to help you, find out what this is and stop it." And I didn't promise that.
Hi, this is Bill Burns from UFO Magazine and UFO Hunters. You know, there are several ways that you can get UFO Magazine.
Yeah, we know, Bill. We know. Just shut up. Just give us one way. Don't tell us you're psychic and, give it 8,000 phone numbers and take 15 minutes of our time when we just want to hear the show. Just tell us how we can get UFO Magazine in one way.
Okay. Just go to www.ufomag.com, subscribe online. You happy?
Yeah, was that so hard?
Actually, harder than you know.
Ray Perkins, a reclusive veteran burned out from the Gulf War, lives tortured by relentless, perplexing nightmares. Nightmares of a horrific battle in deep space and of a mysterious woman suffering in agony for her devastated world. A woman not yet born, calling across centuries to him. Then, a coincidence leads him to his destiny, his chance to alter the universe. Attack of the Rockoids. The former fiction editor for Star Wars and Indiana Jones, Robert Simpson, writes, "The soul of the novel Attack of the Rockoids lies in its heart and passion for building a convincing tale of a love that spans a galaxy, a thrilling story. Attack of the Rockoids is available now. Read a sample chapter and get a special discount off of the cover price at our website, rockoids.com. That's ROCKOIDS.com. Attack of the Rockoids, a novel in the grand science fiction tradition."
This is Leslie Kane, and I'm with the Coalition for Freedom of Information, and you are listening to the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Biedney.
We're talking to Ted Phillips, one of our favorite UFO researchers, because he gets his hands dirty. And right now we're talking about this farmer who wishes it would stop. And I think a lot of people who get up close and personal to these kinds of events feel the same way. Has anyone else said, "Hey, for heaven's sake, we've had enough of this stuff"?
Yeah, to a certain extent. Now, a lot of the other witnesses who are a little more, well, they're not in the areas of sort of drastic events. They view it as something really cool to see. And the more you see, the more you want to see. And so they keep watching, and they're great to let us know when an event happens. And but I wanted to relate just one more animal event on this particular ranch that really should bring home the problem this man has in dealing with it. And that was his prize horse, a very valuable animal, and he drives up. This is a gated ranch and locked, and he drives up to the corral. The horse is in the corral as normal, and a beautiful day, no storms, nothing. And so he gets back in the pickup and he drives off to another part of the ranch. 15 minutes later, he comes back and no horse. And one section of this tubular steel corral has been destroyed. And he looks around and he notices an old wooden barn some distance up from the corral, and the two large, heavy wooden front doors are just destroyed and pushed in.
Huh.
And so he walks up there and he walks in and he finds his horse. The horse now is a mess of blood, body parts, skin, all over all four walls of this barn. And he said it looked like the horse had just exploded. All that in 15 minutes. So you can imagine what this guy is starting to go through. And we were down there on Saturday night, Monday night, and Tuesday night, just before we were down there, his cattle broke through fences and the tubular steel corral, knocked down 2 steel gates, and he has a enormous steer, one of the guys with like 100-foot horns, and that steer takes care of the herd. He protects it, he guides it. They don't do anything without him. And the owner told me, he said, this guy, nothing would want to mess with this guy. And yet something happened on those 3 nights that panicked this huge steer into leading that herd through fences, corral, gates. So we're going back and we're setting up cameras, video cameras all around this corral area and some other areas over on the ranch in hopes of getting some video of what's going on. So it's a bizarre situation.
Okay, during this 15-minute interval when this animal disappeared and then was found to have virtually blown up, did the rancher hear anything, see anything that would indicate something weird was going on?
No, absolutely not. Had he heard or seen anything, he would have been immediately back up there. Because of all his animals, this horse was his favorite.
So this was all done in virtual silence then?
Yes, yes.
Now this is distinctly different when you talk about cattle mutilations, where you've got, and I was wanting to ask you about that before, Ted, where you have on this same rancher's ranch, you have cows that have had body parts surgically removed. Do we assume then, and you didn't mention it, but were the sort of like where they remove stuff, were those areas showing that typical cauterization, that or lack of bleeding?
Well, it's interesting, and I didn't mention that in all of the mutilated cattle events, and some of them he thinks he was there pretty quickly after whatever it was happened, and there was no blood on the animal, no blood on the ground, and which brings me to something I think you'll find of interest. On this ranch, on the 4th of September, this owner was out checking fields, and he looked down into one of the northwest fields, and he saw what appeared to be at first 2 extremely large white dogs, and they were casually walking about 200 feet from his herd, and he said, these things would weigh, I guarantee you, way over 200 pounds. He said, I've never seen a dog like that. And so he grabbed a rifle, a high-powered rifle out of his pickup, thinking that they might attack the cows. And he shot one in its shoulder, and to quote him, he said, I made it red. In other words, a lot of bleeding. And yet, it didn't jump, it didn't yelp. The other one didn't jump, didn't yelp. They had no response to the gunshot and what should have been an impact. They continued walking off into the trees. Well, he went down and he checked. There was no blood where he had shot this thing. So on the 18th of September, an adjacent ranch owned by one of his daughters, she saw 2 very large white animals on her property, and they didn't, either one have any wounds, any blood. They seemed perfectly normal and walking along at a nice slow pace. So over on Site 1, which is 3,000 feet from this area, the property owner's caretaker found clumps of long, thick white hair on a barbed wire fence to the north of the cabin. So I went in and I took all those samples, and no tracks, nothing. The 22nd of October, they found more at another location not far away. I got those. On the 29th of October, more. And the interesting thing about the October 29th stuff is the fur, or hair, was on the top strand of a 4.5-foot high barbed wire fence, and a good deal of the sample, the hair measured 16 full inches in length. So I had a friend who is a leading microbiologist offered to do DNA and microscopic comparative tests, and he really got quite interested in it. When they got the hair, one of the hair samples, some of the 16-inch stuff, the whole lab got into it because it was totally weird. And he sent me back the official report, and then he sent me a report unofficially to kind of get around some of the books and so forth. And he said that they could find no match for this hair. And he sent a lot of comparative microscopic images of dog hair, white dog hair, goat, of course, cattle, bear, just on down the list, and nothing is even close. This is some of the I'm no expert on hair, but it is some weird stuff. It has sort of a silvery cast, and the first thing you'd think it was a snake skin. So that's kind of where we're at on that deal. And on the 11th of December, last December, a gentleman of way more than excellent reputation, who had heard nothing about these white animal reports, a short distance south, saw a huge white animal, which he at first thought was an enormous dog, estimated it at way over 300 pounds. And that theory about a dog went out of his head quickly because it stood up on its back legs, and he said it was every bit as large as a large bear and solid white. And this is the purest white stuff I've seen in hair. And I've got a Old English Great Pyrenees, and lots of white hair there. And I've done a lot of microscopic stuff with it and the unknown, and totally nothing alike whatsoever. Now trying to get some money to get some of the higher resolution trail cameras and set them up, because from the finding of 7 samples of the hair on Site 1, the things are moving in a sort of elongated circular pattern around a field north of the cabin, which I guess by coincidence has presented us with a huge number of light ball cases. So we gave the caretaker a camera to carry with him as he makes the rounds, because what we need is a good photograph of this thing.
So an interesting note, Ted. Our friend Scott Corrales from the Inexplicata Journal of Hispanic Ufology had sent us a news piece, because he knows I grew up in Venezuela. He had sent us a news piece about a week ago about a luminous feline creature seen in northern Venezuela. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is that it's this thing, so according to the witness, the being, which stood at approximately 2 or 3 meters tall, was brilliant white and transparent like a hologram. And it talked about how this thing ran over the surface of water and was just sort of like running on top of the water. And that's a very strange case. But
I think we put that in the unusual category. Lucius Ferry sent me that very report.
Saw this, sorry.
And that's, of course, now I currently am very interested in any sightings of large white animals.
Hi, this is Roger with eFoodsDirect.com, and I just wanted to welcome everyone from the Paracast show. Hi to Gene and David and everybody out there. Listen, we're here to sponsor this radio show because we really like what Gene and what Dave are doing, and we'd like you to help us support them. Now, we are a long-term storable food company. However, the foods that we produce are low-moisture foods. They're very, very high quality, and you can live on them every day. You can literally cut your grocery bill in half, or more than half, maybe as much as 60%, by buying bulk foods from eFoodsDirect.com. UFOHotspot.com. But right now, a recession/depression is on the way. We're advising people to sell the toys in the garage, hawk off the old jewelry you don't use, pour the money into food supplies before it's too late. I'm telling you, it could be too late. We also can provide water filtration, other needs. Call efoodsdirect.com and let us continue to support Gene and David here. 800-715-4380, 800-715-4380, or go to efoodsdirect.com. That's efoodsdirect.com, 1-800-715-4380.
You're in the Paracast with Gene Steinberg and David Bianchi. You never know what's going to happen next.
We're talking to Ted Phillips, and he is associated with the Center for Physical Trace Research at UFOphysical.com. We've been talking about all the strange incidents, not just UFOs, but lots of other stuff. Marley Woods, white animals, everything else. And the question here is, before you got into this case, got involved, caught up in this case, did you ever pay much mind to strange creatures or to cattle mutilations?
No, I did not. Primarily because there was, in all the reports that I knew of, never an incident where a UFO was seen at that point. In other words, like I'm saying, seen generating a trace, seen along with any animals like that, or the mutilations. And obviously, at some point, there had to be something associated with these animals. They certainly didn't just lose all their flesh and organs. Many of these cases, in particular, there was a raft of 6 young calves, and they would find each one, the mother cow, or whatever you would call a mother cow, standing still by what was left of her calf, and there would be nothing left of the calf except a skeleton, and inside or out, no blood, nothing. And the skeleton was not distorted in any way, in perfect condition, and 5 or 10 feet away, a 10-foot scorched ring. And that happened 6 times in about 2 weeks. And so something was there to scorch the ground. There was something there to do the foul deed, and something had to be there to do in this horse.
Ted, is there photographic evidence of like what you just described?
Of the animals, the cattle and and so on. Yeah, we went back and we to this barn, and the problem is again, and it's hard for me to get this over. He had not told me about the horse thing for it had happened about 2 years before he told me, and he'll drop hints, but he doesn't like to talk about this thing. And he especially doesn't like to talk about the rings. On a couple of occasions when his wife was there, he would be describing a cattle thing, and his wife, after his suit, she would say, well, there was a ring there, too. So, but as he's now wanting help, and that's a quantum leap right there.
Yeah.
On giving us, and he told me the last trip, he said, I haven't told you a third of the things that have happened here. And I said, well, you're going to have to tell us all of it, because if we're going to have any hope of figuring anything out. And he said, okay, I will. And I believe he will now. So that's going to be, I'm sure, a lot of very interesting stuff. And the previous owner, the really weird thing, if it can get much weirder, the previous owner, the current owner, was telling me may have been abducted in daylight. And
in daylight?
In daylight, yeah. Very short version of that story. We were in a really casual discussion, and I was talking to him about the previous owner, who in the 50s and 60s and 70s reported brilliant lights coming down, landing, and flying over the ranch and everything. This is now the ranch where all this stuff is happening. And, of course, his family and neighbors thought he was nuts. And so anyway, the current property owner said one morning in the middle of a blizzard, he got a call from the old property owner's wife, and she said, you've got to come help Henry. That's not his name, but and so he asked her, he said, well, help him, how? He said, well, he got up and he walked out into the snowstorm, and I haven't seen him for several hours. And so the current owner and his father went out to four-wheel drive, and he said, I drove all over the ranch, everywhere, and no tracks, no anything, no signs. And he said as we were getting ready to leave the place, there standing by the lane was Henry. And he said Henry was covered with blood from his head to his waist, had no shirt on, one shoe, his jeans were ripped absolutely to pieces, and this was in, 0 temperatures and heavy snow. And he said, I got out, and he said, Henry, what are you doing? You're going to freeze to death. And he said, I don't know. He said, why are you out here? I don't know. So they got him into the pickup. They took him home, and he's sitting there. And they're pumping him, trying to find out what in the world happened. And they said, why did you leave the house in this snowstorm? And he said, they came, and I had to go to them.
Oh, geez.
So, I'm not sitting here saying that he went into a UFO or anything, but it's real interesting stuff. And at that place, that particular ranch, nothing would surprise me, believe me. Nothing.
Now, just a quick question. You've got some stuff here on the website, Ted, about this white hair. Mm-hmm. A couple of questions occur to me. I'm actually looking at this one photo between a dog hair and this thing's hair, and it looks significantly different. There's a real distinguishable amount of detail in the unknown sample, where the dog sample looks like it's kind of like blurrier almost.
Yeah.
Now here's the thing. So the length of these hairs, you have the hairs that are 16 inches long. Is there anything else that we know of? And I'm not by any means a biologist, not any stretch of the imagination. It was like my worst subject in school. But how many animals, presumably I guess mammals, have hair that's 16 inches long?
Yeah, not very many in the area of the Marley Woods. I discussed this with the microbiologist and with a number of friends, and the only thing that was even feasible would be the mane or tail of a horse. Mm-hmm. And so we did the microscopic comparison, no comparison at all, and it's quite significant. I talked to the property owner, and he said there has never been a horse on this ranch. Now, this is Site 1. And so, and not only that, where some of this stuff was found, a horse could not reach, couldn't get there.
All right.
So, and that's kind of where we wound up with the comparative stuff.
So basically, how extensive or comprehensive of a comparison did they run? I mean, so they compared it obviously to horse hair, they compared it to mm-hmm. dog hair. Is it a situation where there is a database they can tap into of a large number of samples of creatures that would not be in the area that they could then do a comparison against? So they did something like that, I take it.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, this is a very major lab, which, of course, like everything else in this business, I can't identify, but they certainly did the work, and they have been a great help. The microbiologist sent me quite a lot of, well, as a matter of fact, he sent me a 35-millimeter camera, a very nice one, to give to the caretaker in hopes of getting a good photo of these things. And also a good bit of equipment for taking DNA samples, and then about 30 jillion pages of how to take DNA samples properly. And so
only 30 jillion?
Yeah, maybe a little more.
Oh, okay. So you're becoming a crime scene investigator here. Well,
you know what? I kind of realized I never really thought about it for many, many years. And I had a friend when CSI came on TV. He started raving every day. He'd say, hey, you got to watch this, man. This is what you've been doing for 35 years, and so I watched a couple of the shows, and actually that's pretty well true. That's basically what we're doing. And we always I always treated those landing sites just like you would treat a crime scene or a murder.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go through the same logical steps, and don't disturb the evidence before you photograph thoroughly everything, and blah, blah, blah. And I would even take transit and throw off sections just like you would do at an archaeological dig. So it's a combination of archaeology and CSI to do it right. And you ain't going to have a second chance to go back to that place because as the property owner tells other people, you're going to find a lot of human footprints and everything's going to be destroyed. So you got to get it while it's there.
Now, how is the local populace treating this? We know they want their privacy, so therefore you're not revealing the actual location of this place. But when things like this happen, do the local kids from school come out and say, let's camp out and wait for an animal to be abducted, or maybe we'll get taken aboard a spaceship or something?
Actually, no. They, with their own families, with kids, they'll go out to some remote location in or around Marley and watch in hopes that they might see something. And they are so great in letting us know if they do see something. And so we're planning, as the weather warms, if that ever happens, on setting up a meeting out at Site 1 with these 219 witnesses and kind of presenting a redo of what we've been doing, what kind of data we've been able to get hold of, images and so on, in hopes of keeping that sort of a tight coalition where we can, continue to get the stuff. And I think they have the right to know what is going on. And I can tell you this, many of those witnesses go daily to our site. And they'll thank me. They'll come up, I really appreciate that. The family reads that just about every day or every other day to see what's going on. So we've got splendid cooperation, really.
Now, a question for you, Ted, and it just occurred to me, you're describing this ongoing situation. There are some similarities to what had been happening at the Skinwalker Ranch thing. So Bob Bigelow comes in, buys up that property, puts some scientific folk in there. He's got quite a bit of secrecy involved with what he does. And, and it makes me think it's time to bring George Knapp back onto the show, Gene. But has it ever occurred to you to potentially approach Bigelow with this situation? Because I think one of the frustrations of Skinwalker was that once they got people out there, everything stopped, from what I gather. So what's your thought about that?
Well, as far as working with Bigelow, that ain't going to happen. He and I have quite a conflict because of the silence aspect. And, I'm not going out to twist and turn and bleed witnesses for information and then never make it available to the public. So that ain't going to happen.
Fate magazine is proud to be celebrating its 60th anniversary and its 700th issue. That's 60 years of bringing you true reports of the strange and unknown. Keep up with the latest on angels and miracles, psychic phenomena, ghosts, UFOs, life after death, and much, much more. It's bigger and better than ever. Subscribe now by calling 1-800-728-2730 or online at www.fatemag.com. That's 1-800-728-2730 or www.fatemag.com. What are you waiting for? Your fate awaits.
Hi, this is Timothy Green Beckley, otherwise known as Mr. UFO, reporting live for the Conspiracy Journal. And we have a special offer for the listeners of the Paracast. Want to receive our publications for free? Conspiracy Journal, and Bizarre Bazaar, sent to you via snail mail. And all you have to do is email me at MrUFO@webtv.net. That's MRUFO@webtv.net, and we'll send you two of the most exciting publications. But we do need your actual address because these are physical publications, and you'll enjoy all the latest articles by some of the leading researchers in the field, as well as up-to-date information on the latest book and videos, and it's all for free. Or drop us a line, MrUFO@webtv.net.
We want to hear from you. If you have a comment or question about the Paracast, send it to news@theparacast.com. That's news@theparacast.com. And don't forget to visit our forums where you can talk to fellow listeners and Gene and Data. Just go to theparacast.com and click on the forum links. That's the forum links at theparacast.com.
We're talking to Ted Phillips. He is a UFO investigator specializing in trace landings, physical evidence that the UFOs or other events leave by. Now, it looks to me like Marley Woods is almost like the entire UFO mystery encapsulated in one community where, literally speaking, you can grab all the investigators who've covered every aspect of UFO research and point them in this direction, or at least the ones that you trust to actually get work done and not just write books and go off on lecture trail, but go in here and do the hard research and maybe get some answers, because it sounds like it's the great place for that.
Yeah, and just imagine for a split second, if we had funding to be able to stay there for some decent period of time, several months, and the data we could gather, and then be able to bring, you see, not all people are like me, old, decrepit, and retired. I can go anytime I want, and a lot of folks just can't afford to do that. So if we had the proper funding, and believe me, we've been trying everything to get it. We keep thinking, look at the data we have from this one area. Shouldn't someone with a little loot be kind of interested? You don't have to chase all over the planet to find this stuff. It's basically there, and it's happening. And if you go there for over 4 nights, I would 90% guarantee you'll see something that you'll walk away scratching your head or something about. And so it's pretty amazing. But funding has always been the problem, I had a benefactor back in '98 until the internet bubble burst. And I used a lot of that at Marley, but to be able to take the proper equipment, set it up in places we know where the hotspots are, and sooner or later you're going to get some really solid stuff. And I hasten always to make it clear, I'm not talking about lights in the night sky. These are much more than that, in that they occur so frequently. They are many times, majority of times, quite close. There are patterns, but so far no patterns that would enable us to say, well, a week from tomorrow we can go down to this spot and they'll be there. Well, we can't do that yet. And the interesting thing, I think you were kind of coming to it a while back. Why? When you look at all the different types of activity, and they have pretty well ran the spectrum, with the exception of little guys. Mm-hmm. Not one single report of little guys. I wouldn't be surprised, however. But other than that, we have all this going on. And there has to be a reason, for example, for this light mass to appear in this certain spot, which is nothing but very dense woods, and it's out in a field surrounded by these dense woods. and the light balls to come back to the same areas. They're not, they seem to be curious about people because they'll come within 40 feet, and in some cases 3 feet of people. And they're interested in following automobiles, lots of cases like that, electromagnetic effects cases. And but there has to be reasoning behind what these things represent. They're not just there to be there. I firmly believe that. Whatever they are.
Quick question, Ted. We don't have much time left. The geological makeup of this region, the rock formation underneath of the topsoil. I mean, have you done research along those lines? Do we have large deposits of limestone in this area? Do we know? Do you know?
Oh yes, yeah. Since I've explored caves since I was 14, I know a lot about caves and limestone, but there is a very large cavern that runs underneath Site 3. And we're right now in the process of exploring it. A lot of it has caved in. But this thing, the Site 3 owner told me that as a teenager they explored it, and even into his 20s, and he said this thing is about 3-4 miles long with some very huge rooms. And so we're in the process of exploring that cave very carefully. And but outside of that, there's nothing extraordinary about the area. There is one thing that, just for the fun of it, more than anything else we're looking into, on that Site 3 is what appears to be a meteor crater of some size with a lot of fragments. And but you know, you just have to turn every rock over or meteorite or whatever, looking for possible reasons. But I can't imagine any connection between the cave or the meteor crater with this stuff. You know, you don't want to reject anything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you don't know what you're dealing with, so you have to look at all of it.
Right.
And it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, I was going to say, you know, I'll bug you about this between now and then, but if you've got that gathering going on in the spring, maybe I'll have to beg, borrow, and steal and rob a bank. And maybe I need to come out there for that, Ted. Why don't you consider that? Because I realize you have a good amount of discretion going on here. But I think this would be really fascinating to come out and to meet some of these people. I mean, one of the things that is pretty clear that is difficult about all of this is that so much of the time what you largely base your research on starts with anecdotal evidence. And so there's the issue of the credibility of the people that are witnessing this, that have brought you in. I think you make the very relevant point that it's not likely these people are making this up for visibility. They'd rather not have any. And so the concern then potentially in even finding someone to fund extensive research is that, you know, if you went to someone who's, let's say, in Hollywood, a big shot, and said, oh, you know, give me some money here, they're going to want to look at it from the angle of, hey, there's a really great story that needs to be told. Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing that maybe, you know, you might be able to get somebody in that world to participate, but I'm guessing that they then want to have some access to the story. Yeah.
Well, as a matter of fact, we are currently, we've been contacted by a producer about doing a story on the SIU and somewhat on Marley. Mm-hmm. And, of course, if that's done, there'll be certain constraints, and they'll have to live with them. But because I'm going to protect these people, I'm not going to lose this resource.
Right, sure.
No, you're exactly right. I think it's just like the Project Moonshaft, the cave in Slovakia.
Right.
We have partial funding. We are going back as soon. The only thing in the way now is some more funding to get proper equipment and so on, because we want to be able to send stuff back virtually live from the site, and it's in a way more than remote area. But and you know, I've also thought, as you were mentioning sort of long ago, wouldn't it be great if we could do this show sometime with you guys in Marley Woods?
Yeah, I would move heaven and earth to make that happen. I'll tell you. I have a few credit card dollars left. I don't know.
I don't know. Mine are kind of slim, but I certainly would like to try to finance that trip. Of course, it depends on how far I have to travel. I have no idea from what you're telling me. I kind of can sense maybe where, but yeah, if it looks like something that I could get to, David and I, it could be the last Paracast show, because what would happen here is that we would do the show, then we'd be abducted, and that's it.
Yeah.
Boom. No.
No, I don't want that.
Cut it out.
Well,
Ted seems to be anxious for this,
Well, I think after how many years, Ted would like to have some redemption here. And who can blame him? I mean, you're working at this thing for this long. I mean, I know in my own case, Ted, I've only been publicly discussing this stuff for a few years now. And I feel frustrated. I can't imagine where you're at with this, where here you are, you're witnessing this stuff, you're gathering physical evidence, and it's still hard to get traction. And this is the part that, we can probably, sort of wind down the show with this theme, is that you're looking at what you're talking about, and this is the kind of story that, people in the mainstream media say, well, there is no evidence. There's plenty of evidence. You're just not willing to look at it. Yeah. And so I can only imagine the frustration you go through on a daily basis with this, knowing that's stuff, right? I mean,
yeah, that's absolutely true. But people like Bill Nye, the science guy, they make it so much easier for me. I mean, I just feel so much better because when you have people that I'll almost guarantee you have never investigated to any extent in the field, at the site, anything related to UFOs, and they become an expert, and they sit there and they smirk while Stan Friedman is talking. It makes my day, really, because they're showing any thinking person in the audience sees what's going on. So, and as far as the only reason I would like to see money coming in is so we could do this the right way.
Right.
I have had to cobble things together from the very beginning, and luckily I was in some positions where I could have access to transits, levels, and that kind of equipment and other equipment. In all those years, Alan Hynek and I managed to get one $4,000 fund, and we made it work very well. But so that's, unfortunately, it's always about money. And right now, Alan used to love, one of his favorite things was